They wept as she lowered the coffin, but no one knew it was empty. Not the priest, not the children, not even the sheriff. Only Mara knew the truth. Her husband wasn't in that box, and what she buried that day was a lie to protect everything she loved. The scream tore across the valley just as the sun broke the ridge. It was the kind of sound that made horses rear and mothers clutch their children tighter. That scream had no words, only a raw, shattering grief that cracked through the air like a bullet. And by the time Sheriff Boone reached the ridge, rifle drawn and breath white in the morning cold, all he saw was Mara Harlan kneeling over an open grave, her nails clawed raw, her dress black as soot, her face turned up to the grey heavens like she meant to drag them down with her. "Mara," he called, voice breaking more from something inside than the climb. "Mara, what have you done?" She didn't look at him, just stared at the pit like it might swallow her next. The grave was too shallow. He could see that even from 10 paces off. The earth was packed wrong, scattered like she'd tried to fill it in and stopped halfway through. The pine box sat lopsided. At the bottom, unmarked, lid pried open and discarded beside it, and it was empty. Boone stepped forward, too fast, almost slipped on the damp earth, his boot sinking. "Where is he?" he asked. Not because he didn't know who. Everyone knew who. The whole town had watched Mara bury her husband 5 days ago under that apple tree. Watched her crumble in front of the preacher, in front of her boys, in front of the coffin. But now the box was empty, and Mara didn't look shocked. She didn't look surprised. She looked resigned. "Gone," she said quietly. I told you he wasn't dead." Boone felt something tighten deep in his gut. He was a lawman, not a man for ghosts or stories. But this wasn't a story anymore. The grave was open, the box was empty, and a widow just confessed she'd buried nothing at all. Back in town, the gossip had started the morning of the funeral, that the casket was too light, that no one had seen the body except Mara, that the telegram announcing Elijah Harlan's death was too clean, too vague. "Wagon accident," it had said. "Fatal. No witness, no recovered body. Just the report of a merchant caravan bound for San Carlos, a crash in the ravine, and one man presumed dead and burned." But Mara had received a package 2 days later. A scorched wedding ring, a belt buckle engraved with Elijah's initials. And after that, she hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't cried in front of a soul, just arranged the funeral, paid for the coffin, and watched her boys place wildflowers at the headstone that read, "Elijah Harlan, faithful husband, father, friend." Gone but not lost, gone but not lost. Mara had carved those words herself. Boone crouched, beside her now, his badge catching a sliver of sun. "You said he wasn't dead. Then what was this?" He gestured at the casket. "Why put on a show?" Her hands, still dirt-streaked, trembled in her lap. "Because if I didn't," she whispered, "they'd never stop looking for him." Boone's face shifted. "Who?" Her eyes finally met his, and what he saw there chilled him more than the wind ever could. "The men he ran from," she said. "The ones who said they'd come for me and the boys next." Boone stood slowly, every instinct he'd sharpened. Over years of riding circuits and chasing outlaws now screaming to life. He'd known Elijah Harlan, not well, but well enough to know he was quiet, strong, dependable. Not the kind to vanish, not the kind to make enemies. But something didn't sit right now, hadn't for a while, and Mara's words knocked loose pieces he hadn't thought to fit together. "Tell me everything," he said. Mara's lip quivered. "Not here." He helped her to her feet. The wind picked up, scattering dry leaves through the graveyard, and as they turned to go, Boone didn't miss the faint tracks leading away from the far side of the hill. Boot prints, one set, fresh, too fresh. That afternoon, Boone rode out to the freight trail where the accident had supposedly happened. It wasn't hard to find the site. Burned wagons, broken axle parts, and scorched earth still marked the spot like a wound that refused to heal. He dismounted, scanning the area. Something didn't add up. No bones, no blood, just wreckage carefully spread. Too carefully. He crouched low and picked up a piece of wood. It crumbled in his hands. Old fire, weeks at least. Long enough for a man to disappear, long enough for a lie to settle into place. But not long enough for the truth to rot. Back in town, whispers stirred again. Why's the sheriff riding out? Grave robbers? I heard Elijah's ghost's been seen on the mesa. Boone ignored them all. He rode past the saloon, past the mercantile, past the schoolhouse, where Mara's sons, Caleb and Jonas, sat quietly, not knowing their mother was back at home with shutters drawn and a pistol within reach, because she'd seen someone the night before. Not Elijah, but a man she thought had died with him. A man named Clay Voss. And Clay Voss had once promised Elijah something terrible. If you ever talk, I'll slit your wife's throat in front of your boys. Then I'll kill them too. She hadn't told Boone that yet. Not all of it. Some stories were harder to speak aloud. Boone returned late, face pale, jaw tight. The wreck was staged, he told her. Too clean, no bones, just enough to sell, a death to someone who didn't want to look too close. Mara nodded. He was trying to protect us. Boone exhaled. Then why the show? She pulled out the envelope she hadn't shown anyone. It was yellowed, creased, and inside was a letter Elijah had written the night he vanished. If they find out I turned on them, they'll come for you first. Don't trust the marshal. Don't trust anyone in uniform. Not even Boone, if he asks too many questions. Trust no one but yourself. Bury the box. Say goodbye. I'll find you when it's safe. Boone stared at the letter, heart sinking, because he recognized the handwriting on the outside of the envelope. It wasn't Elijah's. It was stamped with the seal of the U.S. Marshal's office, and that meant one of their own had sent Elijah to his death, or was still hunting him. Outside, a dog barked once, then a gunshot cracked through the silence. Boone dove toward the door, rifle raised. But by the time he threw it open, the street was empty, except for a single bullet lodged in Mara's porch post, inches from where her head would have been. Whoever had sent that shot wasn't aiming to kill. Not yet. They were sending a warning, and it had just begun. Boone left her house that night with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. And if Elijah Harlan was alive, then the lies that covered his grave were only the beginning of something much darker than a man faking his death. Boone didn't sleep. He rode. From the edge of Mara's porch to the sheriff's office, across the frozen dust of Coldwater's main road, his horse kicking up sparks from the hardpan. The wind howled through the shuttered buildings, the kind of wind that carried whispers if a man had the ears to hear them, and Boone did. He'd heard enough in his years to know when silence was just a mask. He stopped first at the telegraph office. Hammered once. No answer. Hammered again, until the door cracked open to reveal Ellis Rowe's thin frame and twitchy eyes, already yellowed with the bottle. "Sheriff?" Ellis blinked. "What in God's name? Need you to wire Tucson. Now." Boone shoved the note into his hand. "Find out who reported the Harlan wreck. Names, routes, descriptions. I want it before noon." Ellis nodded, lip twitching. "You think it wasn't real?" Boone just stared. "I think if I keep answering questions tonight, you won't make it to the morning." He left Ellis to shake behind the desk and strode back into the night, where the stars bled silver and the land stretched black and unforgiving. He should have gone home, should have shut the door and waited for morning. But something clawed at the base of his spine, the sense that if he stopped moving now, whatever was coming would catch him too. Instead, he turned his horse south toward the canyon. No one lived that way, not anymore. Just coyote dens, dry bones, and the bones of old stories that hadn't been told in years. But Mara had said the tracks near the grave had led that direction, and Boone trusted his gut more than maps. By the time he reached the edge of the ridge, the moon had dipped behind the clouds. It was dark enough he had to dismount, leading the horse by the reins, moving slow enough to hear the gravel crunch under his boots and the whisper of something else. Just ahead, a campfire, small, tucked behind the crag where the path twisted narrow. Boone knelt, crawled forward like a man returning to war, rifle cradled to his chest. The fire crackled softly, but there was no one around it, not at first. Then he heard the cough, low, strangled. From a few yards off, Boone edged forward and saw him, a man, collapsed against the rock wall, eyes barely open, skin ghost pale beneath weeks of dust. His coat was torn, boots half gone, hands blistered raw. But the face, Boone recognized the face. Elijah, he breathed. Elijah Harlan didn't react, just blinked slowly. Once, like the name meant nothing anymore. Boone slid beside him. It's Boone, Sheriff Boone. Your wife's alive. The boys, they're safe. That got a flicker. He coughed again. Thought I was being followed. You were. Elijah's hand reached into his coat, trembling, and came out with something wrapped in oilskin. Boone took it, unfolded it fast, and stared. A list. Names. Dozens of them. Some crossed out, some circled. And beside each, numbers, routes, locations. Boone felt his breath stop. This wasn't just a list of enemies. This was a network. You were working with the feds? Boone hissed. Elijah nodded weakly. They sent me to infiltrate the Circle. Cross. Boone's heart clenched. The Circle Cross. Smugglers, murderers, bounty jumpers. The kind of men who made their money selling others to hell. He'd heard whispers they'd moved north, but no one had seen proof. No one until now. They found out? Clay Voss found out, Elijah whispered. He made me dig my own grave, burn the wagons, sent word home I was dead. Boone's jaw locked. But you escaped! Elijah gave a dry laugh that cracked blood from his lips. Only barely. He slumped forward, and Boone caught him. You're not dying out here. Not after all this, Boone growled. He got Elijah onto the horse, tied him to the saddle, and started walking back. It took most of the night. By the time they reached Mara's, the sky was turning pale and grey, like morning had stretched too long. She opened the door before he knocked. He didn't say a word, just helped her husband down, and she collapsed to her knees in the dirt like the wind had gone out of her lungs. The boys came to the doorway behind her, and for the first time in days, she smiled. It didn't last. Boone could see that smile, held something behind it, grief that had waited too long to break. They got Elijah inside, warmed him, fed him, but he was still weak, too weak to talk. And Boone knew time was short, because the bullet lodged in the porch wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. They knew Elijah was alive. That afternoon, Ellis came running with the telegram. Boone read it in silence. No record of official report from Tucson. Wagon company didn't exist. False seal. Whoever sent it used federal credentials, but wasn't federal. Boone folded the paper slowly. They planted the accident, he said. Used a fake company, staged the death. And someone with marshal clearance signed it. Mara's face paled. You said not to trust anyone in uniform. Elijah, still in bed, rasped out one word. Lowry. Boone looked at him. Marshal Lowry. Elijah nodded. He was the one who recruited me. Said we'd bring the Circle Cross down, but he was in their pocket from the beginning. Boone cursed under his breath. He'd met Lowry twice. A hard man, clean record, but always seemed too polished. And now it made sense. Lowry hadn't sent Elijah to infiltrate the Circle Cross. He'd used him to protect their operations, to eliminate loose ends. And when Elijah got too close, they tried to make him disappear. But Elijah had lived, and now they were hunting him. That night, Boone took a stand. He went to the church and pulled the bell rope until the whole town came crawling from their homes. He stood on the steps and looked out at the people he'd protected for 10 years. "This town buried a man last week," he said, "but the coffin was empty, because the man wasn't dead. He was hiding from something worse." He didn't name Elijah, didn't name Mara, but the point was clear. "There's a war coming," Boone said. "One most of you don't see. It wears a badge sometimes. Sometimes it rides with a freight company. Sometimes it smiles and shakes your hand. But it's coming." "Then what are we supposed to do?" a voice called. "Lock your doors, guard your children, and if you see Marshal Lowry, run." He left them stunned and returned to Mara's, where she sat watching the fire with a rifle on her lap. Elijah said they always sent someone first, to soften things up, someone you trust. Boone sat beside her. "We need to leave, tonight. I've got a place, cabin off the cliff trail. Nobody knows it." Mara looked at her sons, asleep in the corner. "Then we ride before dawn." And they did, but they weren't fast enough. At the edge of town, just before the last rise, a shadow stepped into the path. Clay Voss. He held his pistol loose at his side. Hat tipped low, grin cut deep into his jaw. "Well now," he said, voice slow, "ain't this a little reunion?" Boone drew first, but Clay didn't shoot. He just smiled, because behind him, in the darkness, 4 more men stepped forward, and every one of them wore a badge. Boone didn't lower his gun. Neither did Mara. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with something more volatile. Rage held barely in check, aimed square at the man who'd made her sons orphans in all but fact. Clay Voss stood in the middle of the path like he'd always belonged there, like the entire world was just one long porch and he was the man everyone owed a drink. Behind him, the other 4 stepped into the moonlight. The badge glinted on each chest, but not one of their faces matched a man Boone had trusted. These weren't deputies from Coldwater. These were imports. Killers wrapped in lawman's cloth. "Step aside," Boone said, his voice level but not quiet. "This doesn't need to go how you think." Clay laughed low. "It's already gone. How I think. Sheriff. Or do I call you former sheriff now that you've started harboring fugitives and making speeches like a man with nothing left to lose?" Boone didn't blink. "You're not here for justice." Clay tilted his head. "Justice?" He grinned. "Hell no. I'm here to clean up a mess, but I'm offering you a chance to walk away. Just hand over the ghost and his little family, and you can keep playing town heroes somewhere else." Mara stepped forward. "You buried him once. That wasn't enough." "Didn't take," Clay said. "Sometimes it don't, you know. Dirt's funny that way." Boone's finger tensed on the trigger. Last warning, but it wasn't Boone who fired first. It was Mara. Her shot clipped the man to Clay's left, through the thigh. He dropped with a howl. Boone dove sideways, dragging Mara down behind a low ridge as bullets cracked through the cold night. Horses reared. Dust rose. The air lit with muzzle flashes. Boone fired once, twice, ducked, waited. A shot grazed his shoulder, burning, shallow. But he didn't cry out. Clay's voice cut through it all. "You're only making this worse." And then, silence. When Boone peeked again, Clay and his men were gone. Just hoofprints in the dirt and the man Mara had shot, left moaning, crawling. Boone stomped toward him and kicked his weapon away. "Why Coldwater?" he demanded. "Why now?" The man spit blood. "Because Lowry's coming, and he wants the body still breathing." Boone's stomach dropped. "He's not in Tucson." "He ain't been in Tucson in weeks. He's riding the whole southern line, burning what don't fold." Mara stepped beside him, rifle still ready. "Why Elijah? What does he know?" The man looked up, coughed, and smirked. "More than you do. That's the problem." Boone. knocked him out cold with the butt of his gun. No more questions. They didn't have time. They got back to the house and packed what little they hadn't already. Boone's shoulder bled down his shirt, but he ignored it. Elijah was too weak to ride, so they built a makeshift sled and strapped it behind the horse. Mara took her boys, Dale and Micah, one on either side. Boone kept his rifle across his lap as they left cold water behind. They didn't speak for a long time, just rode. Through the burnt trees where the old rail line had collapsed, past the dried-up spring where the preacher's wife drowned herself 20 years back. Every place they passed carried a story, and every story now felt like it ended the same way, with silence and blood. They reached Boone's cabin just before sunrise. It was nothing more than a box of timber and stone wedged against the cliff, but it had food, heat, and a single bed where they laid Elijah down. Boone stood watch the rest of the morning, rifle on his lap, mind on fire, Lowry, the circle cross, the sealed telegrams, the faked reports. None of it made sense until Mara stepped outside and said, "I need to tell you what was in the box." Boone turned slowly. "You said it was empty." "I lied." She sat beside him, eyes hollowed from days without rest. "I couldn't bury a man without putting something in there, so I put the ledger." Boone blinked. "What ledger?" "Elijah's. From his time with them. Everything he saw, every deal, every name. He said if anything happened to him, bury it where no one would think to look. But I couldn't risk the church or the well, so I buried it with the coffin." Boone stood fast. "That's why they're back. They think you buried proof." Mara nodded. "Not think. They know." Boone cursed under his breath. "We need that box." "It's still in the Coldwater Cemetery, East Plot, 3rd row. The grave marked Elijah Harlan." Boone was already mounting up. "I'll ride now." "I'm coming," she said. Voice iron. He looked at her. "You sure?" "I buried him once," she said. "I'm not letting strangers unbury him again." They left the boys with Elijah, locked the door, and rode fast. Through gullies and frozen fields. Through a snowstorm that hadn't been forecast, but rolled over the hills like vengeance. They reached the cemetery by dusk. The plot had already been disturbed, boot prints, shovel marks, and the coffin, open, empty. Boone looked around, saw the tail end of tracks leading east, fresh, maybe minutes ahead. He turned to Mara. "You ready to kill for it?" She nodded. "I already did." They followed the trail through the trees, guns ready, hearts thundering. Boone knew they were walking into a trap, but he also knew what was at stake. That ledger could bury the Circle Cross, could expose half the territory's corruption, could buy Elijah his life back. They reached a clearing and found the fire again. Not one this time, but 3. A camp half set, horses still saddled, and at the center, sitting calm like a man playing poker with death, was Lowry. He stood when he saw them. "Sheriff Boone," he said. "Didn't think you'd come yourself. Give me the ledger." Lowry smiled. "It's not yours. Never was." "You burned it." He held up a bag. "Leather. Singed at the edges, but not destroyed." "I'm not stupid," Lowry said. "You think I'd ride all the way here just to destroy something this valuable?" Boone narrowed his eyes. "You're selling it. To who?" "Everyone," Lowry grinned. "Whoever pays enough to keep it buried." Boone aimed. "That's not how this ends." But Lowry just lifted one hand. From the trees, men, 6 of them, all armed, all dressed plain, not law, not gang, just hired death. Boone counted fast. Not good odds. Then a sound behind him. Hooves. Mara turned. From the ridge. Riders, townsfolk, Coldwater men, Ellis Row, even Doc James, armed, riding hard. Lowry's men hesitated. Boone didn't. He shot Lowry in the leg. The camp exploded into gunfire. But this time, Boone wasn't alone. Mara beside him. Ellis flanking. Even little Dale had followed with. a pistol tucked in his belt, eyes wide but steady. When the smoke cleared, Lowry was on the ground, bleeding out. Boone stood over him. "You could have walked away," Lowry gasped. "So could you," Boone said. Mara picked up the bag. The ledger was inside, every page intact. And now the whole world would know. But Boone wasn't smiling. Because as he turned, as the relief began to break across the faces around him, he saw the flash of a rifle barrel aimed not at him, but at Mara. He yelled, but the shot rang out. Mara didn't fall. Not at first. The shot echoed across the clearing like thunder off stone, and everyone turned, Boone already moving, already raising his gun, already screaming something wordless and raw. But Mara just stood there, eyes wide, blinking like the sound hadn't caught up to her body yet. Then her knees buckled. Boone was there before she hit the ground. Blood pooled from her side, dark and fast. He pressed both hands over it, trying to stop what no man could stop with just pressure and hope. Her eyes fluttered. She tried to speak, failed, then found his hand with hers and squeezed once, hard. Boone turned, fired 3 times into the trees. One of the hired guns tumbled from the branches above, his rifle still half raised, eyes wide even in death. The rest ran. Lowry's men, what was left of them, scattered into the snow and shadows like roaches at dawn. Nobody followed. Not yet. The fight was over, but something worse had just begun. "Doc!" Boone roared. James stumbled forward, still shaking from the fight, but his hands moved steady the moment he knelt beside her. He opened her coat, cursed softly, pulled a kit from his bag. "I need hot water! I need rags! I need light!" Boone shouted orders. Ellis and 2 others lit lanterns. Someone ran for water. Boone didn't move from her side. "She's gonna make it," Boone said. "Tell me she's gonna make it, Doc." James didn't look up. "Bullet passed clean, but she's lost a lot. We need to get her warm. Now." They carried her back on a makeshift stretcher, Boone holding her hand the entire way. Dale and Micah followed, stunned, silent. The cabin was cramped, crowded with too many people and too much fear, but it was warm, and it was the only place they had. Mara drifted in and out. Fever caught her quick. Her face went pale, then red, then too still. Boone stayed at her side, every second, even when Elijah stirred in the corner and whispered, "You shouldn't have come back for me." Boone turned. "She didn't come back for you." Elijah tried to sit, failed. "Then why?" Boone looked down at Mara. "Because someone had to finish what you started." The ledger sat on the table, stained but legible. Names, dates, deals, land grabs, disappearances written off as accidents, bank records, shipments. There were enough crimes inside those pages to put half the Southern Territory in irons, but none of it mattered if Mara didn't wake up. 3 days passed. The townsfolk rotated watch. Dale never left the porch, sitting guard like a boy twice his age. Boone barely slept, and on the 3rd night, just as the storm outside finally broke, Mara opened her eyes. She didn't speak at first, just looked around. Then her voice, hoarse but alive. "Did we win?" Boone laughed, broke down right there beside her. "Yeah," he said. "You won." She slept again, but this time it was real sleep, healing sleep. Doc said the worst was behind them, but Boone knew better. Lowry had been a blade. The circle cross was the hand that held it, and if they sent him, they'd send worse next. He waited until morning, then called a meeting in the cabin. Mara, still, weak but upright. Elijah, seated, pale and quiet. Ellis, Doc James, and 3 others from town. Boone laid the ledger flat on the table. "We publish it," he said. "Every page. Get it to Tucson, Prescott, wherever someone will print it." Ellis frowned. "You think the law will care?" "They'll care when every voter south of the river sees their tax money paid for gunmen and stolen cattle," Boone said. Mara nodded. "We don't need justice from the courts. We need pressure, public shame, sunlight. Doc added, and what about us, when the Circle Cross finds out? Boone didn't blink. They already know. He pointed to the ridge. Behind the house. They're watching. They've been watching since we got back. Nobody argued. Fear ran through the room like ice. Boone leaned in. So we don't wait. We ride tonight. Deliver this to the telegraph station 2 counties over. They'll send it by wire. Fast. Mara looked at Elijah. You're coming. He shook his head. I can't ride. You have to, Boone said. They want your silence. We give them your voice instead. It was after midnight when they left. Boone, Mara, Elijah, and Ellis. Dale begged to come, but Boone made him stay behind with Doc and Micah. The journey was quiet. Too quiet. Snow muffled every sound. The night felt thick, like it was holding its breath. They reached the canyon pass, just before dawn, and that's when the shots started. Boone ducked. Mara rolled behind a rock. Elijah fell from his horse, too slow to react. Ellis returned fire, screaming Boone's name. Shapes moved through the snow. Circle Cross men. At least 10 guns crackled. One of the horses screamed and fled. Boone dragged Elijah behind cover, hands slick with blood. You hit? Elijah nodded. Leg, not bad. Boone tossed him the ledger. If I fall, you keep moving. You hear me? But Elijah didn't nod. He said, I'm tired of running. Then he stood and shouted, You want me? I'm here. I ain't dead. Gunfire tore the air, but he didn't stop. Walked into the clearing, bleeding, upright, screaming their crimes. They think you're shadows, that you're dust. But I remember. He collapsed, just as Boone hit the last shooter from behind. When the smoke cleared, only Boone and Mara stood. Elijah bled in the snow, but alive, and in his hand, the ledger, still whole. Boone picked him up, threw him over the saddle. We're finishing this. They reached the station by midday, a small shack, a wiry man behind the counter. Boone slammed the ledger down. Wire this! Every page! Everywhere! The man looked at them, eyes wide. It'll take hours. Boone nodded. Then don't stop. They stood guard until sunset, guns drawn, horses ready, and when the last page was sent, Mara looked at Boone. What now? He looked to the horizon. They'll come. She nodded. Let them. They came at dusk, as Boone said they would. Not in a charge, not in a thunder of hooves, but in silence. 4 riders, slow and clean, dressed in dust-grey coats, with no marks, no badges, and no words. The kind of men who didn't ask permission to bury bodies or send telegrams. The kind who didn't come to town unless something needed erasing. One led his horse with one hand and carried a lantern in the other, the light swaying like a snake's tongue across the path. The others rode with their heads down, but their eyes never left the cabin. Boone stood on the porch, rifle in one hand, coat open like he wasn't afraid of dying cold. Beside him stood Ellis, younger, thinner, too tense to hide the shaking in his jaw. Mara sat just inside the cabin, Elijah behind her, leg bandaged, ledger wrapped in canvas and tucked into the stove's hollow. Burnt on the edges just enough to make copies less likely. She held her revolver on her lap, thumb brushing the hammer now and then, a habit that had become something like prayer. The lead rider stopped 10 paces out. You, Boone Morrow. The voice was older than the man it came from, deep, cracked, like sandstone, and smooth with authority that didn't need shouting. Boone didn't answer. The man didn't ask again. We got some questions about a wire came through yesterday, the rider said, dismounting with a fluidity that hinted at years of hunting things more dangerous than deer. Heard tell it came from someone out here. We heard tell a lot of things been buried out here too, Ellis muttered. The man ignored him. His eyes settled on Boone. You know what kind of attention you just brought to this county? Boone stepped off the porch. The kind it should have, had years ago. The man smiled. Not wide, just enough. You think people care about a ranch war out in the nowhere? I don't need people to care, Boone said. I just need them to look. Behind him, Mara's voice was calm and clear. They already are. The second man reached into his coat, and Boone raised his rifle instantly. Easy, the rider said, hands still. It's just a letter. He pulled it out slowly and tossed it onto the porch. Ellis picked it up, handed it to Boone. The seal was still warm from saddle heat. Boone opened it. The letter was from the territorial governor's office, stamped, signed, and fake. He didn't need to read more than the first line to know it. The words were too polished, too legal, promising full review pending additional evidence and urging cooperation with federal investigation. Boone folded it neatly. This supposed to scare me. The rider didn't move. It's supposed to warn you. Next time we don't bring letters. From behind, Elijah coughed. Then bring coffins. Mara stepped out beside Boone now, coat drawn tight. Her skin was pale, but her eyes were hard. You send Lowry to silence us. Now you send ghosts. They're not ghosts, Boone said. They're smoke, and smoke always means fire. The rider's face darkened for the first time. You think because you printed some ledger, stirred. Some townsfolk, you've won something. Boone took a slow step forward. No, I think you just lost something. Your shadow. The man laughed, but it was thin now. They left without another word. Boone watched them go until the last hoofbeat faded. Then he turned to Ellis. Get Micah. We ride tonight. Again? Ellis asked, exhausted. To where? North, Boone said. Next, town up. Then the next. We carry it in person. Talk to every preacher, postmaster, drunk, and widow willing to listen. We keep this fire lit until someone with real power has to answer. Mara leaned against the doorframe. What about the ranch? They'll burn it. Boone looked at her. They already did. And she understood he wasn't talking about fire. They left by midnight. Dale wanted to come again. Boone let him this time. The boy didn't smile. Didn't even pack much. Just slung a shotgun over his back and nodded when Boone told him it might be a one-way ride. By the third town, the news had moved faster than they had. Papers already printing the story. Some twisted it. Others added names that weren't in the ledger. But most repeated the truth. Elijah Kane hadn't died, and the Circle Cross had tried to make sure he did. Boone watched people read it on wooden benches, in barbershops, through cracked windows. Some wept, some scoffed, some locked their doors, but they read it. And then came the telegram. It reached the hotel in Crow's Hill just before dawn. The desk clerk knocked on Boone's door like she was delivering a death sentence. He opened it, read the message. It was 5 words. She's gone. They took her. Boone didn't breathe. The sender's name was Micah. They rode back in a straight line, no sleep, no stops, burned through 2 horses. Dale fell behind, and Boone didn't even look back. The cabin was gone by the time they reached it. Not burned. Gone. Walls caved in. Roof collapsed like someone had torn it down with hate. Doc James sat bleeding on the porch, hands bound, face swollen. He looked up. 10 men, maybe more. They knew who to grab. Boone untied him. Ellis stepped over the rubble. Who else was here? Just me, James said. She told them nothing. I swear, Elijah was already sifting through the wreckage. They want me. She was leverage. Boone stared at the trees, the road, the sky. He saw nothing. He heard his own breath. He tasted blood in his mouth and didn't remember biting his tongue. Where would they take her? Dale asked, limping into the yard. Boone didn't speak, just turned and walked toward the horses. Boone, Ellis said, chasing him. Where would they take her? Boone mounted, looked down at them all, to the only place where graves don't. Get names. The abandoned mine. Everyone in the county knew of it. No one went there. The ground was soft, the shafts unstable, the air poisoned. But it had entrances deep enough to swallow secrets whole, and Boone had always known they'd use it one day, not for awe, but for silence. They rode as the sun fell behind them. No trail, no guide, just Boone's memory and the smell of burnt pine on the wind. Elijah kept to the back, watching the horizon, like it would betray them if they looked away. Ellis rode tense. Dale kept touching the handle of his shotgun like a habit he hadn't had a week ago. They reached the ridge before midnight. The mine entrance loomed below, a black mouth in a stone face. No lights, no guards, too quiet. Boone dismounted first. No shooting unless I say. They crept to the edge. Then they heard it, a voice, calling weakly. Mara. Boone didn't wait. He ran, through the brush, down the embankment, into the mine's maw. The others followed, gasping, tripping over roots and rocks. Inside, the dark was thick enough to choke on. Mara! Boone shouted. Where are you? A faint cry answered. Farther in, they moved faster. Boone ducked under beams, stepped over, rusted rails, until the tunnel opened into a wide shaft lit by one single lamp. She was there, tied to a post. Eyes open, breathing. Barely. Boone ran, cut the rope. She fell into his arms, whispered, It's a trap. The door slammed behind them. Boots echoed above, guns cocked. Boone didn't flinch. He looked up and saw the man from the porch again. Grey coat, lantern swaying. Should have burned the ledger, he said. Boone stood. Elijah, he said softly. Behind them, Elijah had stepped into the center of the room, limping, pale. He raised both hands. I'll come, he said. Let them go. The man laughed. Too late. But then Elijah smiled. No, he said. You are. He dropped a match. Nobody saw the oil, but everyone smelled it a second too late. The match struck oil with a shuddering bloom of light, a breathless roar that cracked the silence like bone. It happened faster than anyone could shout. The flame raced across the floor of the shaft in a jagged tongue, catching every trace of oil Elijah had poured in those last trembling minutes while they scrambled into the mine, while Boone checked her pulse, while Dale loaded his shotgun with fingers still shaking. It climbed the rail ties, the walls, the ropes. It made no distinction between mercy and vengeance, and in the half-second before it reached the barrel at the back of the chamber, the one no one noticed except Elijah, the world turned white. The blast wasn't just fire. It was pressure. Earth cracking, lung-shattering pressure. The ceiling of the mine blew outward, rock and rusted timber shooting skyward like a cannon shot. The hillside above split and sank as if God had stamped it down with his heel. Inside, it was worse. Light and sound exploded together in one violent pulse, and then the dark swallowed everything again. Boone didn't remember hitting the ground. He only remembered waking up on it, with Mara coughing beside him and his ears ringing like war bells. The ceiling had held, barely. Smoke curled through the cracks. The shaft had half collapsed behind them, cutting them off from the way they came in. The trap door and the men behind it were gone. Or buried. Ellis, Boone called hoarsely. Dale, Elijah. No answer. Mara tried to sit up. Blood smeared her temple. He was right behind you, she said. He dropped the match and pushed me. Boone turned. Elijah! A figure staggered through the smoke. Ellis, coughing, blackened, one sleeve burned nearly off. I got Dale, he rasped. He's breathing. Elijah's not here. Boone rose, staggering, vision blurred from the smoke. We need light, something, anything. Ellis handed him a half-smashed lantern. Boone took it, sparked the flint until the tiny flame caught. It cast enough light to show the shaft beyond was half collapsed, but just wide enough for a man to crawl through. Boone knelt, ignoring the pain in his ribs. I'm going after him. Boone! Mara grabbed his arm. That tunnel's coming. Down. I won't leave him. She didn't argue, just pressed her hand to his cheek. Then hurry. Boone passed the lantern to Ellis. If I don't come back, ride north. Get her out. Go to Ashford's Ridge. He'll shelter you. Ellis nodded, but his eyes said something else. Boone didn't stay to read it. He dropped into the gap, crawling low, rocks biting into his forearms, dust choking each breath. The tunnel was warping, groaning, timbers popping like ribs under too much weight. He crawled faster, called Elijah's name, got nothing. Then, just when the dark felt endless, he saw it. A hand, half buried beneath a fallen beam. Elijah. Boone rasped. No answer. He crawled the last feet, dug madly with both hands, ignoring the splinters, the burning in his lungs. He uncovered the man's face, bloodied, unconscious, but breathing. Boone shouldered the beam, lifted, screamed, and moved it enough to pull him free. He didn't wait, threw Elijah over one shoulder, turned, and crawled back the way he came. Behind them, the tunnel creaked once more, and then collapsed entirely. But Boone had made it out. He dropped beside Mara with Elijah limp in his arms. He's alive, Mara didn't cry. Just reached to check Elijah's pulse, then looked Boone in the eye. Good, Ellis was already standing. We've got minutes before they come digging. Boone helped Mara up. Then we don't wait. Dale was awake now, dazed, covered in soot. He looked at them all and asked, "Did we win?" Boone didn't answer. They rode west first, into the deep brush, avoiding the trail. It was dark, and the stars offered little light, but Boone knew every crooked bend of this land. He chose paths that snakes wouldn't even trust. By dawn, they reached a riverbank no horse could cross fast. Boone signaled to stop. "We split here," he said. Mara looked up sharply. "No, you and Elijah head north," Boone said. "You've got the ledger. What's left of it? That's the proof. Ellis and I ride south. We'll make noise. We'll draw the rest off." Mara didn't argue long. She could see it had to happen. Elijah couldn't take another hit, and Dale, somehow, was still steady enough to ride. They traded quick goodbyes. No speeches, no promises, just eyes that said, "Live, finish it." Then they split, and Boone, true to his word, made noise. He and Ellis rode straight into every saloon, every post, every camp of hunters and pilgrims and gamblers, talking loud and clear about the Circle Cross, the fake letters, the mine. He handed out what pages they had, scratched the rest onto whatever paper they found. It didn't matter anymore if it was pretty, it only mattered if it burned. Word spread faster than even Boone expected, so when they got ambushed, it wasn't in secret. It was in front of a crowd. Boone and Ellis had just ridden into a small ranch town called Griffin's Gap. They were headed toward the post when 5 men on black horses came around the general store. Guns drawn, coats long, faces blank. But this time, a dozen locals saw them, and instead of running, they stood. One woman screamed, another grabbed a rifle. A boy not older than 15 picked up a brick and held it like it meant something. The lead rider didn't blink. "Hand him over," he told the crowd, the one called Boone. A silence. Boone stepped forward. "I'm right here." The man raised his gun, but the brick flew first. It hit his shoulder, not hard enough to kill, but enough to throw him off. Then came the rest. Guns were raised, but not just the riders. The townsfolk opened fire. It wasn't clean, it wasn't fast, but it was enough. When the dust cleared, 3 of the black-coated riders were dead. The other 2 fled. Ellis crouched beside Boone, who was bleeding from the arm. That wasn't supposed to work. Boone smiled faintly. Truth's a funny thing. It doesn't just spread, it sticks. And so it did. The news reached the bigger cities next. Reporters came riding. Some of them even believed it. Others just liked the story. Widow, buried in empty box. Husband lived. Ledger of sins. Mine fire. Locals rising. Old ranch empire dying. It all sounded too good not to print. which is exactly what Boone wanted. But it wasn't over. Boone knew that, because the last man hadn't shown himself yet, the one who ordered it all. He had a name. Boone had heard it once, whispered in a jail cell back east, back when he was still in uniform and thought justice came in brass buttons. His name was Warren Lowe, and he hadn't been seen in 5 years, until the day Boone found a letter nailed to the gate of the Ashford place. Mara was inside, tending to Elijah. Boone read the letter 3 times. Then he turned to her. "He wants to meet." Mara's face went still. "Where?" Boone folded the page. "The place it all started." Mara frowned. "Your father's ranch?" Boone nodded. She stepped closer. "Then we go together." "No," Boone said. "You stay. Watch over Elijah." Mara didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "We go together," she repeated, and Boone didn't fight it this time. They rode out the next morning, just the 2 of them, toward the ranch long since burned, the land where bones still turned. Up after storms, where a little boy once hid in a cellar, listening to his family scream, and came out into silence. They didn't speak much on the ride. They didn't need to. They knew this wasn't just about vengeance. It was about the last lie left unspoken. They reached the ranch by dusk. Lowe was already there. He sat beneath a dying cottonwood, cane across his knees, hat low over his face. He looked older than Boone remembered. Or maybe Boone just felt younger now, standing in that scorched place, beside the woman who chose to stay. "You came," Lowe said without looking up. "I always do," Boone said. Lowe smiled. "You've done a lot of damage. You call it damage. I call it digging up graves." Lowe finally looked up. "What do you want, Boone?" Boone didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Your name, in print, as the one who ordered it all." Lowe chuckled. "You think I'd give that up?" Boone shrugged. "You gave up everything else." Lowe looked past him, to Mara. "I should have had her killed when I had the chance." "You tried," Mara said. "You failed." Lowe rose slowly. "Then let's end it." He drew, but Boone was faster, not with his gun, with his voice. He shouted, "This is him!" And 6 men stepped from the trees. Deputies, witnesses, reporters. Lowe froze. Boone stepped forward. "I told you," he said. "Truth sticks." And now it was nailed down. They didn't hang Warren Lowe right away. That would have been too simple, and not nearly as clean as the truth deserved. No, they took him in alive, face tight with disbelief, as though he still couldn't quite understand how the tide had turned against him, as if the world itself had played some cruel trick by remembering what men like him had always counted on being forgotten. Mara watched him get loaded into the wagon, hands shackled, pride leaking from his posture with every step. Boone stood beside her, quiet, but the cords in his neck were tense like drawn wire. The trial came a month later. It was held in a courthouse that still smelled like damp plaster and tobacco spit, but that didn't matter. Every bench was filled. Outside, folks leaned against windows, crouched by doors, some having ridden 100 miles just to see the man behind the smoke and ruin. There were miners, old ranch hands, women who'd once cleaned the rooms of the Circle Cross and had stories they were no longer afraid to tell. Every single one brought a piece of something broken, and now, finally, it was being stitched together in daylight. Boone testified last. He didn't wear his gun. He didn't even wear his coat. Just stood before the room in his plain shirt and boots, calloused hands folded, and said in a steady voice, "My family was burned to ash because they wouldn't sell. My wife was taken for dead because she knew the books didn't match. The man who gave that order sat behind his desk writing checks and pretending his hands were clean. But justice don't care how clean your hands are. It only cares how many are buried beneath them." No one spoke after that, not even the judge. They found Lowe guilty on every count: fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, and the 6 smaller charges that finally gave the law its teeth. The sentence came swift. Life in federal custody, no parole. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They just stood and watched as the man who'd once owned the valley was dragged out of it by the very system he'd used for years to make himself untouchable. But even as justice was finally done, the dust didn't settle. Not for Boone. Not yet. Because the truth, the real one, the one only a few still knew, wasn't in the ledgers or the papers or the courtrooms. It was in the empty box. Boone returned to the grave a week after the verdict. Mara came with him. She didn't speak as he knelt beside the headstone, fingertips brushing the edge where the name had long since faded from sun and rain. It read, Jonah W. Carter, beloved husband, father 1873, 1899, except it wasn't his body under there. It never had been. I buried it myself, Boone said quietly. I made sure no one saw. Mara didn't move. Boone looked down at the grass. He came to me the day after the fire. I was hiding in the cellar, covered in ash. I thought he was a ghost. Mara looked over. He survived, she whispered. Boone nodded. Burned, bad, but alive. He begged me not to tell. Said if the Circle Cross thought he was dead, it would buy him time. Said he'd dig for proof, that he'd come back when he had it. And he never did. Boone didn't answer, because she was right. His father never came back. Not really. Just letters, clues, whispers from towns 2 counties over. Boone followed. Everyone, hoping, cursing, praying, and every time, he found nothing but a trail gone cold. Until the day he found a satchel outside his door with a blood-stained journal inside. Pages torn, but enough to see the math didn't add up. Enough to see the Circle Cross had been forging shipments, laundering land deals, burying bodies, sometimes literally. The last page just said, forgive me, burn it all. So Boone did. He gave his father a grave because it was the only peace he could offer. And then he became a ghost himself. Until Mara's letter dragged him back into the world. She knelt beside him now. You never told me. I didn't think I'd live long enough for it to matter. She took his hand. It does. For a long moment they sat in silence, wind rattling the grass, the air thick with something that felt too big for words. Not grief. Not exactly peace, either. Just the heavy hush of something finished. Later, they returned to the Ashford place. Elijah was waiting, still bandaged but upright, sitting on the porch with a tin cup of coffee, and Dale beside him, his left, arm now in a permanent sling. Ellis had already gone, rode east with a reporter who offered him a job tracking stories across the territories. Said he wanted to see the country without burning half of it down. Boone watched Elijah quietly, his mind turning. I think it's time, he said. Mara looked at him. For what? To let the world know whose grave that is. She hesitated. You sure? Boone nodded. He died trying to fix what he helped build. People should know that. So they carved a new stone. Not big, not loud, but honest. It read, Jonah W. Carter, who tried to right his wrongs, died in the dark to bring others light. They placed it in the same plot. And this time, it didn't feel like a lie. As the weeks passed, the town changed. People came, settlers, farmers, men and women, with calloused hands and tired dreams. They built slow, careful. No more ranch lords, no more bought sheriffs, just neighbors. And every now and then, someone would ask about the fire, or the trial, or the ledger, and someone would tell them how a widow buried an empty box, how a man returned from silence, how a lie became the start of something true. One morning, Mara stood in the doorway of the little house they'd started building. Nothing fancy, just 2 rooms and a fence made of crooked wood. She was holding something. Boone looked up from the porch. What's that? She smiled softly. Letter came from Missouri, from your mother's cousin. Said he found something in the attic. Boone took it, brow furrowed, opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. Old. Faded. But there they were. Boone as a boy, sitting on his father's lap. His mother beside them, hand on Jonah's shoulder, smiling like she'd just stolen the world and didn't plan to give it back. Boone held the photo, like it might break. Mara rested her head against his shoulder. "You look just like him." Boone laughed quietly. "God help me." They sat like that for a long while, not speaking, not needing to, just breathing the same wind that had once carried smoke and gunpowder and all the ghosts they'd tried so hard to outrun. Now, it just smelled like the beginning of something else. Later that year, a book was published. The Widow's Box, a true story of justice on the frontier. It sold poorly, too quiet, too complicated, but those who read it never forgot it. Some wrote letters to Mara thanking her. Others came to see the graves. Some just rode past and tipped their hat at the fence line, as though paying respect to a story they didn't quite understand, but felt in their bones. Boone didn't care about the book. He only cared that Elijah got better, that Mara smiled more days than not, that the nightmares came less, and that when he walked through the town, people looked him in the eye. Not with fear, not with awe, but with understanding. He was one of them now, no louder, no better, just another soul trying to live right in a world that didn't always let you. One evening, Mara came to him on the porch, barefoot, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one. "You ever think about what's next?" Boone took a sip. "I used to. Now I mostly think about what's right in front of me." She smiled. "And what's that?" Boone looked at her, then out toward the horizon. The sun was setting in streaks of fire and honey. Kids were laughing down the lane and, somewhere in the distance, a bell was ringing. He said, "You, this, the rest of it, we'll figure out as we go." She leaned her head on his shoulder. And for the first time in years, Boone didn't feel like something was chasing him. He felt like he'd arrived, at the place beyond the fight, beyond the grave, beyond the box that once held everything he'd lost. Now it held nothing. And maybe that was the point. Because when you've buried every lie, what's left is only truth, and the people who chose to stay after the smoke cleared.